Hello, I'm Leo Serda, and I'm the founder of More Traction. We help climate tech startups build products that people actually want. After a lifetime in product development, I started More Traction to give climate tech startups the best possible chance of success. It's easier than ever to build a product, but we don't have time for climate techs to build products that nobody wants. So we help them quickly define a business model and execute a plan with a heavy focus on validating before building. It's all about making sure that we found the right idea before we build it. In today's podcast, we're going to explore a problem specific to what we call the value proposition. So I'm sure many of you have come up with ideas for your product and even features for your product. And then when you need to translate those into a pitch deck or into a website, the words don't just easily roll off the tongue. And to help us understand that problem and to help us understand some ways around solving that problem, joining me on this show today is Adrian Stewart from Scale Messaging. So Adrian, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you think that you can help us understand this problem any better.
Thanks for having me on, Leo. So yeah, my name's Adrian. I've spent most of my work life obsessed with communication and human behavior. So I'm not really that interested in marketing, but I'm fascinated by why people make decisions. And that's probably been the main thing that's driven me. I'm a copywriter and also messaging strategist. So I've done brand strategy and brand messaging for many years. And then recently, over the past 2 years, I've co-founded a business with Will Chan, who's my business partner, called Scale Messaging. And Scale Messaging is all about helping businesses communicate their true value. And the reason that we founded the business, or the reason that it's evolved like this, is because we identified that there is a gap between the true value of a business and the perceived value of a business. And
because they don't really know how to explain it?
Yeah, essentially. So what happens is that often a business has a lot of value. There's something really great there, but they can't articulate why it's great. So it's like, we've got this amazing business, but then when they try and talk about it, and I don't just mean in words, in person, but when they try and write about it, that value doesn't come across. So the issue is that the reason people aren't buying into it or buying it is not because the offer is not great, but because it's not being expressed in a way that resonates with those customers. And fundamentally, that's what our business is about, is helping to bridge that gap between true value and perceived value. And we've done, as you'll know, because we've done some work together as well, a big part of what we do is actually developing A/B tests. So we test messaging treatments where we will develop one test where it's focused on a certain type of message, another one focused on another, to actually validate these assumptions. So we found a pretty good niche in that space of actually not that many people seem to be focusing on the message. They tend to be focused a bit more on tactical and quick hacks and
on conversions and whatnot.
Yeah, well,
so let's take a little step back for a second, and let's just start with perhaps some basic definitions, like what the hell is a value proposition? Because it gets thrown around a lot, and I've heard a bunch of definitions in my time. So please enlighten us. I'll challenge some of those.
Look, to start with, no one agrees on definitions, and I hate definitions because when you get stuck in definitions, you get a little bit too caught up in an academic labeling of something rather than what's the function of this thing. And I would say the function of a value proposition is, the easiest way to understand it is to flip it around as a customer, because we're all customers in our day. Like, the value proposition is essentially, what value do I get from this? Like, that's, if you're going to break it down at a simplest level, what value is it? You could then break that down to say, well, how is it different? Who's it for? What you put in the value proposition depends on a lot of, on context, but ultimately it's like a proposition of value. It's kind of in the name. It's like, here is the value that you're going to get from this.
And would you, is there like a right and a wrong way to write a value proposition? Or how do you even go from, oh, I've got this great idea, I've got these product features, how am I going to go and now turn that into a value proposition, or into something succinct that embodies that value?
Well, I think the way to answer that is to first off realize that there is not just one value proposition. There is a layer of value propositions. So this one line thing that people are like, oh, here's our value proposition, and it's a one line and that's it, that sums up our business. It's like, that's not the whole story, because
Agreed.
you need to be able
What are those
to,
layers? Yeah. And like, how do you think about those layers?
well, you need to be able to communicate value in different levels of complexity, right? So the high level value proposition, which is typically like a headline and maybe a subhead, is trying to sum up the core of the essence of the value in as few words as possible, in a way that's compelling and gets people to want to know more, right? So it's the core of the value. You've distilled it to its essence. You know that these are the most important things to communicate, because this is what we know the customers care most about. This is where we have a point of difference. But then where I think a mistake a lot of people make is they go, oh, cool, well, there's our value proposition. And let's assume someone hears the value proposition and is like, oh, cool, I'm interested. Then what, right? The value proposition needs to have supporting pillars and statements underneath there. So I think the reason that I don't like value proposition is calling it this, it's just a single line, is because the whole thing is a value proposition. It just depends on where in that purchase funnel, where in the awareness journey someone is as to what elements you need to communicate. Because at a top line level, it needs to be very simple. Get more leads, increase your conversion rate with this, I don't know, easy to use software, for instance. And then they go, okay, cool. But then there needs to be things that support that.
The follow-up, the supporting. And look, you touched on something that I've seen a lot of people struggle with is everyone sort of obsesses on that one-liner, that sort of sentence to rule them all. And I think people also very quickly start to think in terms of kind of marketing speak and catchy taglines. And so is that the wrong way to go about it, to try and make it too kind of salesy or pitchy? And second part of that question is, what I found often happens when people try and condense it down to something snazzy, catchy, short, is that it becomes way too generic and kind of it's lost all its sort of specificity. So is that perhaps because we're trying to answer everything with one line instead of thinking about all those different layers? And I don't know, there was about 5 questions in there, sorry.
Yeah, it's a good questions. I think the essence of that is that, hang on, ask the first question again, because I had an answer to the first one.
The first one was around whether it's unfair to expect to make it too marketing catchy quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So number one thing I would say is that always opt for clarity over clever. Right?
Good tip.
Don't try and focus on making it really cool and catchy and how do I make this so clever? And most of the work should go into uncovering what is all the value that we have to communicate. So the steps usually is digging to uncover what the value actually is. So what value do we have here? And then you want to prioritize that value based on how much or how important those points of value are to the customers. And obviously, in order to do that, you need to know what customers care about. So you map out all the different features of your product, or depending on what it is, the features or aspects of your offer. And then you want to get all that down. And then you want to be able to rank those by which ones customers will care most about, right? Because if they care a little about it, then, well, we don't really want to lead with that. But if it's something that's super important to them and that's what they're looking for, well, then we're probably going to lead with that first because that's something they want. Yeah. And then the second filter to put through it typically is differentiation. So what of the features do we have are ones that people care most about that is also something different to the competitors or different to the other options they have? Generally speaking, and to overly simplify it, they're the things that make it to the top of the heap. The things, it's your biggest differentiated strength. Often it ends up being the core of the value proposition. But there's other layers to that as well, because if people don't know what it is, then you can't say, again, I don't know, like get more leads, increase your conversion rate. But then they're like, yeah, I want that. But if they don't know what you're actually offering, what this thing is, like maybe is it a service? Is it a platform? Is it a coaching thing? So clarity of what something actually is, especially for say clean tech product, where it might be something innovative, being able to explain what it is in a really short way is also super important. So I think the clarity is really important. And I wouldn't necessarily advise trying to focus on making some. Let me stop for a second and say the one-liner is the result of doing the rest of the work and figuring out all the
as opposed to starting with the one-liner and then trying to go from there. Okay. So it's almost like the exec summary. So you've done all your legwork and then you go, boom, this is the one page you should read first. Okay.
It's way easier to write the exec summary when you know the contents of the deck.
Yeah.
So you need to do the work first, and then it becomes way easier. Like if you do the like mapping out that value and discovering it and prioritizing, you know the messages that you have to work with. So you know the arrows that you can shoot, so to speak, the things that you have in your quiver. You're like, all right, well, this one is a strong one, this one, and then you can just sort of work to put them in a sentence, and it's way easier than trying to summarize everything straight up.
And you touched on something I think is really important, and it's almost like the foundation of any of this work or any new product is a good understanding of your customer. And I've often found that one of the easiest ways to come up with these messages is precisely by anchoring them. It might sound obvious what I'm about to say, but anchoring them in needs, pains, objectives, as opposed to feature, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
so you want to talk a little bit about that? I just find people tend to talk about themselves a little bit too much and not talk enough about, okay, what is this your thing is doing to solve that specific customer problem?
Yeah, I always try and work back from the customer first, because ultimately communication, especially messaging or marketing, or anytime you're putting these words out there on a page, you're not doing it just for the hell of it. Like, you're not doing it just to go, hey, here's some words. You have an objective. So this is objective-based communication, assuming that you're a clean tech product. Maybe it is you want to generate interest to raise funding. Maybe you want to get signups for a platform. So there is a goal that you want to accomplish there, right? So you are essentially, you want whoever is going to read that to think a certain way, to feel a certain way, and then move to your ultimate goal, which is your conversion. Now, the only way you can do that is to understand this person and what they need and what they want and what their pains are. So it's no good just saying, we have this, we have that, and then expect them to do the work, like, because there's too much friction. The role of good messaging is to almost preempt those questions and make it such a frictionless experience for someone's like cognitive understanding, that they just go, oh, okay, I understand what it is. I understand the value. Oh, that's how it's different. Okay, they've worked with these people. I trust them. Oh, what do I do next? Oh, here it is. So I think it's a very powerful way is to really unpack the customer and not just go, what are their pains? That's helpful, but really put yourself in that mindset. And the benefit I think people have here is that we are all customers and we all use websites all the time. And we all go through this same process when you go sign up or land on a page. If you actually just take a moment to reflect on what questions you're asking yourself when you land on a page, and then you're probably going, I don't understand what this is, or how is this different from another? These are the questions that people are asking. And
so what are these questions?
Well, there's quite a few. So Will and I have been trying to codify this. This is kind of a big part of what we've been doing, is to try and, so essentially we've discovered that there's 4 key categories, I would say, that you could break it down into. So one is about understanding. So that's around, what is this thing? And that's the real fundamental kind of do not pass go basis that you need to hit. Because if you don't understand what something is, it's very like, you might tell me the value, but I'm still like, well, hang on a sec, this sounds good, but
what are you even talking about?
What are you even talking about? And we've noticed it's such a big, that area alone, by fixing understanding and fixing clarity of, for instance, okay, what is it? What's included? Like they're probably the main 2. What is it? What's included? How does it work? I would say are probably the 3 key ones that need to come across. How does it work? It's a little bit lower, because how does it work is a question I only ask once I have some value, right? I don't care how it works unless I know that it's something I value, which brings me to the second category. So one is understanding, two is value, right? So value is essentially like, why should I care? Like, what do I get from this? How is this better than the other options available to me? And so on and so forth. The third one, and they're not always in order, but this is like the general order. The third one is around motivation. And this is a bit of a tricky one because it does connect with value, but value is a little bit more about how the offer provides value, how the features will provide value, and points of difference, whereas motivation is more about that higher level motivation. So what is it that they're wanting to accomplish? So, I mean,
ultimately, what's their goal kind of thing?
For instance,
what's pushing them or pulling them to seek out a solution?
Exactly. So it might be like, okay, losing weight might be a goal, right? You could, if you've got a lot of messaging focused on communicating value about, let's say, for instance, you have an offer that's like an online personal training, right? And you're talking about the benefits of online training and, the subscription support groups, and you're focusing on the value of the offer, but you're not talking about the motivation as why losing weight is good, how they'll feel about losing weight, how good they'll look in their clothes, or on conversely addressing the fears, like what are they trying to avoid? So it's more keeping that momentum of motivation going, because generally speaking, people have some base level of motivation when they arrive in any page or in a pitch meeting or whatever. So understanding how motivated someone is coming in is a really important guide to help you understand how much more you need to touch on motivation. So I'll give you an example. Someone searching on Google, say, I don't know, like personal trainers Perth, right? Like hire personal trainers Perth, and then they click an ad from that. They have pretty high intent because they're already searching for this specific thing. They've decided they want a personal trainer. They're at least interested to search for it. So their motivation is a bit higher than someone who might be saying how to lose weight, right? So the messages that you might communicate to those different people would vary slightly because their motivation level is different.
Music to my ears. So the value proposition or the messaging should align with the customer segment.
Correct, with the segment, and then also to add more complexity to it with the where they are in that purchase journey. So, I just want to round out those four things. For the last one is trust. All right. So that the questions that might come with trust is like, how can I believe your claims? Who else has used this? Has anyone that I know endorsed this? What do other people say? These sorts of questions. So anything that will help build trust and credibility in the claims that are being made.
Just on that last one, because I've seen a lot of people struggle with this, particularly at the beginning. So when you don't have hundreds of customers under your belt, you don't have years of experience under your belt, then is there a proxy for trust? How do you communicate trust in the absence of those, I guess, traditional trust marks?
Well, I would ask the question of yourself, like, what makes me trust something? All right. And I mean, obviously you're not always the target market, but it could be the design. It could be that there's pictures of the founders on the page. It could be that, for instance, if you're doing email communications, maybe there's, and it's just you're a solo operator, there's a picture of you or there's a video of you talking and they feel some sort of connection. You provide the address of where your office is. There's all these little things that fundamentally trust is about removing anxiety and uncertainty, because let's say that I understand what it is. I see the value. I'm motivated, but I'm not sure if I can believe you. So and I'm anxious that if I take that next step, how do I know that I'm not going to get ripped off? Or if I have an issue, then I can't get it resolved. So you need to consider ways to remove that anxiety. If it's a product, it could be a guarantee. If it's a service, it could be a 14-day free trial, or essentially things that will help reduce risk and increase trust. there's many different ways to do it. But again, I think the core insight here that we've found is try and move away just from thinking of the tactics and just think this of psychologically, what makes you trust something? Like, because we all have this is the thing that I find that we all know, because we are customers and we're doing it every day. You go on a website and you're like, I don't know, that looks a little bit dodgy. This, like, something about this doesn't seem right. Like, the reviews all seem a bit sketchy. Like, there's the formatting's off. Like, there's nothing about
the font is in fluoro.
There's things that will trigger your suspicions. And we want to find ways. And I'm talking, like, this applies for most contexts, right? But it does apply particularly for when on a web page. So I think a lot of what I'm talking about so far is about communicating on a page, but the same principles apply in any communication, right? And I think the insight, just to probably that takeaway, is reflect on how you make decisions, and then realize that you're going through this same process. You want to know what it is. You want to know what's included. You want to see what value it is. You want to see how it's different. You want to be motivated enough to take action. You want to see how it's going to improve your life. And then you want to be able to trust them. So I think all those things come together to help create a message that will resonate.
This is awesome. I'm just going to recap some of the things that I've just heard, because I've been taking notes as you've been going all through this. So don't sort of aim to go for the one-liner straight from the beginning, but that should be like the product of your other investigation and your writing that you've come up with, and with a heavy focus on clarity over being clever. I think that's a really nice line. I think it's also really good what you said about prioritizing value depending on what customers care about. So you are leading with the things that you know are most relevant to them, and then you might actually drop some of the things that are lower on the priority list because, you know, maybe the site didn't allow you to expand that much. You also mentioned that your biggest differentiating strength should be somewhere in that mix.
It should be pretty high up. Like, often the biggest differentiated strength is like the way I like to think of it, which might be helpful by way of an analogy, is like, think of it like a spearhead, where in order to cut through or to penetrate, you need to concentrate everything into that tip. And that's essentially that. I mean, ultimately that's your positioning, your brand positioning, and then the value proposition. And you have cascading levels of detail underneath that. Right. So you have the tip up here, and then underneath that, you have your supporting points, and then you have more detail and whatnot. Because if you sort of take that tip away and you go straight to communicating all the supporting points, well, that's not going to cut through. You're not going to get any penetration with that, because it's like just a blunt object hitting a wall. Yeah. You want to be able to have the strength and force that will help that arrowhead pierce through. But in order to do that, you've got to be able to simplify it to that level. It's much easier to simplify to the tip when you know what the rest of the pyramid or arrowhead, however you want to conceive it, what that foundational stuff is, because there's levels of depth and detail. You touched on it when you said executive summary. I think it's a great way of understanding it. If you start talking about the minutiae of details to the exec team, they don't need to know that, and they don't want to know that. They want you to tell them the things that they care most about, and they want you to tell them in a way that suits the way they want to consume it. So generally speaking, that's brief, clear, and relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you gave us these 4 categories to think about when explaining these messages and unpacking that value proposition, I guess. And those 4 were sort of understanding. So clarifying the understanding. So what it is, what's included, perhaps how does it work? Clarifying the value. So why should I care? What are the benefits that I'm going to get? And then motivation. So appealing to that higher order kind of outcome, less than it's not so much a product feature or a product benefit, but what is the ultimate outcome that's driving me to seek out a solution. And then really importantly, you mentioned about trust, is how can I believe your claims? Why should I buy this from you? And I think one thing I took away from that last point on trust, just because I know so many of our listeners are new businesses with hardly any customers and hardly any sort of traction yet. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you explained it is, even if you don't have those sort of traditional, look, I've got 5,000 reviews and I've got so many customers in the past. In the absence of that, you shouldn't sort of shy away from trying to convey trust through other means, whether that's, as you suggested, a photo, whether it's a little bit about me, whether that's a really professional design instead of some sort of scrappy website, right? But is there a need to, like, are those four key areas equally important? Do you have to kind of tick all of the boxes? I guess you shouldn't really leave one out, right?
It's a good question. And the answer is like contextually dependent, but in terms of the beginning to end, I've engaged with this particular offer and right through to I'm going to convert, whatever that conversion might be. All those things need to be hit in some way. Okay. The reason I say it's dependent on context is because, let's say, for instance, I want to order a pizza, right? I don't need them to tell me how good pizzas in general are and how satisfied I'll feel eating a pizza. I'm looking to see why I should choose pizza joint A over pizza joint B. And in that case, they need to be communicating that they have the freshest ingredients, or theirs is wood fried, or they've got fast delivery. At that stage of my decision-making journey, I've already decided I'm motivated to have a pizza. I kind of already have that motivation. So I don't need you to be like banging on about how delicious it is. But in an advertisement, for instance, where it's just like trying to create the desire for pizza, right? So it might be, actually competing against burgers, and I'm trying to get them to buy pizza instead of a burger. Then I might be trying to like really get across how amazing pizza is. So it does depend on the phase as to which one you emphasize. But I think in terms of the purchase journey, yes, all of them need to be hit. There's always variables, right? Some people were more trusting than others, so they might not need all those trust marks. Some people are more, generally speaking, the more motivated someone is, the less important everything else is. Like if someone really, really wants something, they will overcome friction, and the one thing I just wanted to add there, because I don't think I touched on it properly, is probably the most important value proposition question that you can answer, and a really good way to start is, why should I choose you and not the other options, or not another option? So why should I choose your offer and not something else? That's a good way to start thinking about those reasons as to what makes your offer unique and different. I think typically is a good prompting question for people to go, because generally people go, oh, well, because of this helps you do that, and feature A does this and that. That's kind of a good way to start getting some of those thoughts down. But like, we've developed some templates and formats which can really help people through this. We've kind of field tested them a lot to try and make them clearer. They're continually being improved, but I just wanted to touch on that before we move.
That's great. And if someone wanted access to said templates and a little bit of your help, how can they get in touch with you, Adrian?
For now, you can just email me, adrian@scalemessaging.com. We are looking to, we're working on a course essentially to help people go through this process on their own. We've been doing this quite a while, and then we've been systemizing all this knowledge, and we're really trying to get it to a point where essentially we identify the problem that there's only so many businesses that we can help one-on-one or on a service level. And there's also a lot of businesses who aren't at the stage where they can invest in that help. So we've been trying to codify that knowledge and approach so we can kind of, to start with, maybe coaching people through, and then eventually build something that is just self-generated and can really help you get the foundations of your messaging sorted.
Awesome. So look, one last tip from me is that, look, this process is inefficient. So don't expect to nail the messaging first pass. Don't expect that you'll write 3 paragraphs, Bob's your uncle, and you're going to use it in every single channel, your ads, you're going to recycle that. But this is definitely a test and learn approach. And as Adrian sort of suggested, it depends on the context, depends on the audience, depends on where in the buyer's journey they might be. But Adrian's given us an awesome start to a way to unpack that and think about that. So Adrian, thank you so much for spending some time with me today on the show. And I look forward to our next work together. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, Leo. Thank you.